Aloha, everyone. This is Tasha Church on Maui, and I am here for the Empowerment Roundtable. And these are my friends who are joining me today. They are also part of the Empowerment Roundtable. I will just go around and have everybody introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Magdalena Diaz, she, her, hers. I am in California. I've done advocacy work for 10 years, supporting survivors of interpersonal violence. And currently I work on a college campus addressing these issues from a policy lens. I'm also a level one empowerment self-defense instructor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rika Portas. I'm from Hungary, but I've been living in Hawaii in the past 6 years on Oahu. And I've been working for 2 years for a college campus in my community as a crime prevention specialist. And also, I started teaching self-defense classes last year when I took part on the level one empowerment self-defense training. And I've been also volunteering for a couple of organizations who work with women. And I'm excited for this roundtable.
And as I said, my name is Tasha Church. I do empowerment self defense, and I've been doing self defense work for 18 years. I really love what I do. Outside of that, I also do online communications. So, this is the perfect way for all of us to be able to come together and share our voices and share stories, but also come at it from an empowerment lens and be able to talk about these different events and discuss violence prevention strategies along with some different tools that might be helpful for you at this time. Reika, Magdalena, what are some other reasons why you wanted to have this roundtable?
So for me, it's important for what Tasha you just mentioned, but also from a prevention standpoint. Again, um, based on my knowledge and my experience, when we think of prevention, we think of prevention out in our community. But we're a lot of times there's not a lot of resources for facilitators or practitioners to also do prevention within our community or within ourselves. And I think the roundtable is a great way to spread prevention within our communities of practitioners or facilitators, also to have a space to be able to process this information. I mean, it's factual that a lot of facilitators and practitioners have experienced gender-based violence. So creating a space for them to be able to process, especially with current events and how they can be activating. And to have the tools not just in the classroom when they're teaching self-defense, but when they're out in their communities to deal with these things that might be activating for them.
Yeah. Reika?
Yeah, I agree with Magdalena. I feel like this roundtable will be a good place of healing and also just a good place for letting out our perspectives and feelings with the current events, which can be activating and traumatizing for some people, for many people. And yeah, I feel like just this will be a good place for us as self-defense instructors to discuss these things and invite other professionals as well to share their perspectives on how they can help survivors of violence.
Awesome. And just to put it a little bit into context, too, for all of us, we ended up connecting more as a group in our trauma informed course through ESD. And so it was this great opportunity for all of us to come together. And through our group sessions, we started talking about current events and how triggering those were for all of us. And just being able to have that outlet, I know that for me personally, it was something that was really needed just as we were going through layers and layers of trauma informed curriculum, but then also to be able to just have these two awesome ladies to be able to talk to about everything that was going on. It was very healing for me. And so I, along with these two other ladies, were talking about it and we're saying, we should really get together after after this course and still be able to do this. This was so nice, and it's been really great to have this opportunity to just be able to have this outlet and be able to discuss different issues that are going on. And we wanted to start sharing with all of you. So I'm really excited for us to be able to delve into some of the different topics. And there's so many different things going on.
Oh
um,
yeah, for
yeah.
Where do
sure.
we start?
Oh God. Well, Reka, you had an article that you brought up today, and I thought that it was relevant. So, do you want to
Oh
just share?
yeah, I guess sure. I guess let's dive into it right away. So we discussed. So this is relating to the whole Save Our Children narrative we discussed last time, but I guess we need to introduce it again today. What we're talking about. So, who wants to do that? I can try to summarize it, but you two,
Yeah, we
yeah,
can.
Yeah.
We
yeah,
can.
yeah.
For Save the Children, that has been a hashtag that has come up in, I would say, more so in recent months than it has before. And definitely, obviously, everyone wants to save the children. We want to save children. It's a very noble cause. But looking at it and from a broader lens, where is this message coming from? Is it being politicized? Is it something that is being spearheaded by a particular party? Where's the narrative? So just looking at that from a different lens. And Magdalena, I don't know if you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you summarized that really well. So, since quarantine, I think that, or not, and it might have been going on before quarantine, but I think it was became more popular during quarantine. There's this hashtag of Save Our Children or Save the Children in regards to human trafficking. And obviously, all of us doing this work, we know that human trafficking is an issue, and some of us have been addressing human trafficking for a while. Um, but the narrative around human trafficking with the Save Our Children hashtag is really restrictive, and it's only talking about human trafficking from one lens, which is that of children being trafficked, right? Again, us doing this work, we know that human trafficking impacts a bigger uh, at a bigger scope, right? We're dealing with children, but we also deal with women and men. LGBTQ and trans youth tend to be impacted by human trafficking at a higher rate. We also know that communities of color, indigenous women, brown and black women are impacted by human trafficking at a higher rate as well. And this human trafficking or Save Our Children movement has really only focused on a single narrative, which is children being trafficked. And it has become a political, and the word I use is a political gimmick, right? And that's been something that's been very activating for me, understanding the complexity of human trafficking and seeing it be used as a political gimmick, to make people feel like if you're not against this, or if you're not posting this hashtag, then you are for it, because that's also the narrative that's been pushed, right? If you're not against human trafficking, then you are for it. Because I've also seen things of like, COVID is not important, it's Save Our Children, which again,
Mm,
we don't binary, right? We can be um aware and want to address both issues. um so I do believe that it became a political gimmick, to make people feel a certain way. It has been connected with the current administration and what the current administration is doing to save our children, to save the children, which again, obviously we will always be in support of an administration funding, or giving more budget to address this. But we can't forget how this administration has impacted the issues of gender-based violence, in a negative way, in other aspects, right? So again, it's really shifting the narrative to make it seem like this administration is really trying to eradicate human trafficking. But this just came up right before an election, which again, we can talk a little bit about what that looks like and what that means. But also how gender-based violence is such a large issue that just because they might be funding one program, but harming other programs, we need to look at that and see, we need a bigger solution that addresses all the issues. So that's kind of my understanding of it and what it's been done. And it's this narrative. It is also connected with bigger conspiracy theories in
Mhm.
regards to
mhm.
Pizzagate, which is like this idea that politicians and celebrities are in like this ring, right? With there's
Mm-hmm.
trafficking children, which we know happens again because we do this work. We know that there's politicians and celebrities that because and being somewhat a predator or a harm doer, it can be anyone in our society, right? It can be a celebrity, it can be a politician. So we know that's true, but we also know that it is more common for a harm doer to be someone within our community and not like a celebrity, right? And everyone should
Hmm.
be held accountable regardless of what their status in the society is.
For
Yes.
sure. And the other thing too is, I mean, if you look up Pizzagate, it is something that has been debunked. Um, Proven multiple times
Yeah.
over. So just looking into and doing your own research, I think is really, really important. If you have somebody who you trust who's giving you information, it's also good to listen, learn, but then go and do your own research. So, someone, for me, they came to me and were talking to me about wanting to vote for Trump because he cares about the children. And and it was this disregard for COVID and other issues, and then saying, don't you care about the children? And for me, I am part Native American, one of the most highly trafficked demographics. Um, Globally, if you look at Indigenous women, especially, they're one of the highest trafficked demographics. So it's something that I do care about. It's something that I've worked on when I was back in Washington State. There were different groups that I would partner with. And I think that it is very interesting to me that there are a lot of us as practitioners who have been doing this work for a very long time, and it is something that is very important to us. And now it is something that is suddenly important to everyone else. And I generalize it, but I just think that there's a much broader scope of people who suddenly care about saving these children when there wasn't that factor or that care before. And I've noticed also, as far as the demographics go, for who are more interested in it, I'm seeing a lot more Caucasian women who are posting about this, when predominantly the women who seem to be most affected are women of color.
Yeah.
So,
That
yeah.
note,
Yeah.
Tasha, like I think it's what you said is really important about doing our own research. And one of the red flags for me in this narrative is exactly what you just said, that when I started doing my research, it was being pushed by a lot of white women who maybe don't really don't have experience doing this work, right? And at least in California, or in the group of in my group of people that do this work, it's mostly Black and women of color that are practitioners or working with survivors. So to me, that's a red flag that we're not seeing any advocates or women of color that have been working to eradicate not just human trafficking, but gender-based violence. They're not talking about this, right? So I think, again, when you're doing your research, these are the experts in their field, and they're not, their voice is not being centered. The voices of survivors are not being centered, and instead it's these other women that might not have a lot of connection or experience. So again, as you do your research, look at that too. Who is it that's talking about this issue? Where is their experience coming from? What is their goal in having this conversation? And again, if it's not centering the individuals that are actually doing the work and have been doing the work for years and survivors, then that should be something that you should consider.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I just agree with
You
you, and I
also
think you summarized this whole topic and the issue very well. And how I started seeing this, because I did my training 2 years ago for a local organization who works with survivors of sex trafficking with underage children. I mean, with children. And I started posting about this topic and raising awareness on social media. But back then, no one really cared about it, and they were even like, "This is unreal. This is not happening. Like, what are you talking about?" I even got comments like that. And then I was so surprised because a few months ago I started seeing posts on, and it was in this narrative of like, why should we care about COVID when a child disappears every second, and so on and so on, even to the extent that some people were advocating for not wearing masks because wearing masks makes it harder to find the missing children, something like that. So it became clear to me very early on as well that this is a very loaded, very politicized movement, this hashtag Save the Children, which I find really sad because human and sex trafficking is really an issue, but approaching it from this way and spreading these false narratives, this misinformation, is not going to help with that. And you two mentioned really well that these are also part of or fueled by some conspiracy theories of the QAnon and Pizzagate and other stuff. So I think that's awesome that people like kind of like this is out there now, like people know about that this is happening, human trafficking and sex trafficking and child trafficking. But yeah, people just need, I guess, more right information, more education to know like how to help with this issue. Yeah, but there are also some questionable organizations, and that's another problematic part of it when there is like an organization which has hundreds of thousands of people following and supporting them, but they're also perpetuating a false narrative, have questionable methods. And yeah, and just connecting that, what Tasha mentioned, what I told her is I just read an article this morning about the very famous organization, the Operation Underground Railroad, and how they are under investigation right now for fraud and for some other questionable methods, like how they um, intend to save the children and survivors of sex trafficking. And this organization is very popular and is supported by many people. I saw many of my friends supporting them. But right from the start, they seemed somewhat sketchy to me. I don't know how you two feel about it, how much you know about this.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't have a lot of information about it, so all I know is what you sent me, and that's something that's great. You know, we you sharing an article for me to be able to read so that I can make up my own decisions on how I feel about these different topics. You know, another thing that you had brought up was the funding. So earlier this year, there was 35 billion dollars that went towards supporting different organizations that have are working on human trafficking, which is huge. But follow the money. Where is that going? Like, which organizations are they proven? Are they just connected? What is the purpose? What's the mission? So that's something that I think is really important to note. Magdalena, you had also mentioned something that I think is really critical when it comes to human trafficking that other people need to think about. So this was at an earlier time, not on this session, but basically when we were talking about human trafficking and with families who are migrating to this country. A lot of times they're not necessarily migrating with their parents because their parents are already over here. They're working, they're trying to do all they can to get their kids over here. So I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more about that as a perspective that might be an aha moment for other people.
So
yes.
I, alongside of doing survivor work, or gender-based or anti-violence work, I also am a huge advocate for immigrant rights. I am an immigrant myself. Came to this country as a child, entered the country without status. So I have personal experience of what that is and like the cultural components that play a role in this. And then in my professional once I've in my professional setting, I've also done a lot of work with immigrant communities. Um, so we also have to look at this issue from an intersectional lens, right? And again, that's one of the, it's always great to bring awareness to this issue. I think all of us can agree, like doing this work, we're always pushing like for awareness, right? Like we want people to be aware. This is what we've been doing, right? For some of us, like most of our life. But bringing it also from an intersectional lens and looking at it from how does it impact different communities. And this, one of the critiques for the Save Our Children narrative is that it's not intersectional. It's really only focusing on a one-dimensional narrative. Immigrant communities are also impacted by human trafficking at a higher rate, and not just sex trafficking, but also when it comes to work, labor, being trafficked for labor. Um, so that's one thing, right? That's another huge issue there, that a lot of women are being trafficked into this country with false promises, and then they're end up being trafficked for and sold for sex and things like that. But the other narrative, or something, when I've had conversations with individuals that are posting about Save Our Children and how this administration is trying to eradicate human trafficking, one of my criticism is the detention of and separation of children at the border, because we've also seen reports and actual commentary from people of their own personal experience, how there are a high number of reports in regards to children being sexually abused while in detention centers. Also, children being lost to the system, and when they're lost to the system, possibly end up in human trafficking as well. And when I've had this conversation with folks, they said that actually Trump separating children at the border from the adults was to save them from being trafficked, because what they were finding out is that a lot of these minors were coming in with someone that wasn't their biological or legal guardian. And that was the narrative that was being pushed. Like, we're not separating them from their families, we're actually saving them, right? And again, from my own personal experience, being part of a community that is impacted by immigration and just doing work with immigrant survivors, I know that a lot of times children do come to this country without their legal or biological parent. And the reason, like Tasha shared, is a lot of times the parents will come to the country first to try to save money, right? And be able to bring the children over. So the child might be coming in with another family member, a grandparent. That's very common in a lot of Latin. And I'll only speak from the Latinx lens, because I identify as Latinx. Um, so a lot of times it might be a grandparent or uncle or an aunt that's stayed in the home country taking care of the child, and once the parent has been able to save enough money, might try to then bring them over, right? So yes, it's true, when they're being detained, that person might not be able to prove that they have some kind of relationship, which is also very common, right? It's not like the parents are leaving their home country and going to get documentation to make that other family member a legal guardian. Most of these people are literally getting in debt to try to come here. They're not going to have money to go through some bureaucracy to have some documentation stating this person now is the legal guardian of my child, right? It's a very common thing in all Latinx communities for other family members, and not just in Latinx, a lot of communities, right? It's a tribe. Everyone in the family takes care of the minors or the children. So that is true, that children are coming sometimes with people that might not be legal guardian, but it doesn't mean that that individual is trafficking them. And it's also understanding those cultural components and not just pushing this narrative of like, well, we know that they're being detained by people that are not their parents, so they must be being trafficked. It's understanding that cultural component, that it's very normal for children to stay back in the home country with a family member and then try to come to the US with that individual. The other component, and I can speak from personal experience, is a lot of times the individuals that bring migrants into the country don't want to bring children in with them because they're at a higher rate of getting caught by immigration if they bring children. So a lot of parents are forced to separate themselves from their children and have them cross the border with someone else, right? And again, people are saying like, oh, parents are handing over their children to these traffickers, but they're really put in a situation. Again, you have to think about this, these people probably, and not, when we're talking about people from Central and South America, they've crossed multiple borders before they even get to the US Mexico border, right? They are in debt, they have nothing to go back to, and then they get to the Mexico USA border, and the person that is going to bring them over says, we can't cross you over if you have a minor or a small child with you, because it's going to slow us down. A lot of times they cross into the desert, through rivers. It's very unsafe for children, right? And they're saying, we can't cross you over with your child. We have a different way, a safer way to cross your child over. And again, as a parent, I'm a parent myself. If I was put in a situation where they're telling me it's safer, I might, trust them and be willing to do that. And now I could be accused of saying I'm trying to traffic my child, when in reality I was just trying to ensure that they were safe, right? Or sometimes they're put in a situation that that person that's going to bring them over says, like, I won't cross you, I won't help you cross with a small child. And again, at this point, you're out of money, you're already almost here, and that's your only option, right? And parents will hand the child over, um, to be brought in a different manner. And then if they're detained, again, people are saying, see, the parent was trying to traffic, or these children are being trafficked. And it's easy to judge. It's easy to say, as a parent, I would never hand over my kid to someone else. But again, we need to understand these cultural, economical factors that play a role in why parents make that decision. I mean, the parents want what's safest for their child, and sometimes they think that is the safest way to do this. Um, so those are some of the factors, I think, that are not being considered when this Save Our Children narrative is being pushed. So again, I was activated when I heard someone say, like, oh, this administration is separating children at the border to save them from trafficking, because parents themselves are trafficking children, or they're handing them over to traffickers. Because from personal experience and just being part of that community and working with migrant communities, I know that that's not true, and most parents are trying to save their children, like they are trying to save their children, right, from being exposed to danger. So those are things, again, doing our research and really putting those things together. And again, if you're a parent, it's put yourself in that situation. What would you do, right? If you literally spent all your savings and you're almost about to make it, and they tell you, we have a safer way to cross your child, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Oh, go ahead, Rika.
you explained it so perfectly, Magdalena. Like the whole what you said deserves a whole another clip to share from the podcast, because this is great, because this is a pushback I get a lot when I talk about human and sex trafficking, that like, yeah, we need to build a wall because the most trafficking happens on the borders, and just how you explained really well that there are so many misconceptions when children are crossing the border and what is happening there. And I feel like so many times people like exoticizing, I don't know if that makes sense, exoticizing this whole trafficking thing, that this only happens to immigrants, this only happens to people of color, and we're kind of, we need to save them. But that's not exactly how sex trafficking works most of the time, based on what I learned at this local organization. And yeah, what I learned there while working, it works differently, and not exactly how the children are being kidnapped from parking lots and so on, but in a different way, and can happen really to anyone. But for sure, some populations are more at risk. But it's so great that you explained this whole connection with the border crossing. I think that will be very helpful for many of our listeners.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's again, looking at this issue from an intersectional lens, but also not. I think a lot of the Save the Children part, like one, I think even the terminology of saving, right? When we only focus on being saviors, sometimes we won't take a step back and address like the cultural factors, right? The socioeconomic factors that play a role in how people live their life, and how, again, like with the migrant families, how that is a common, maybe in the US, it's not common, right? To have like the grandparents and the uncles and the cousins helping out. but in a lot of migrant communities that is normal, right? And so I think when we give ourselves this saving or savior complex, sometimes we can do more harm than help. And we have to, I think that's connected to what we were mentioning about, like, you know, these operations of saving children, all this funding going into like law enforcement, which yes, it's great, you know, people should be held accountable, but what about helping in these communities, right? Through education to talk about, like, why are these communities impacted at a higher rate by human trafficking or sex trafficking or labor trafficking, right? Like, where's the education piece, the transformative piece, the restorative piece, to really address this issue not just from a personal lens, but community lens, because being reactive instead of being proactive with this issue. And that's, I think that's why for a lot of people that have been doing anti-violence work, it's just doesn't sit well, because it's reactionary, and it's also pushing this fear agenda, right? We should be fearful. I think connected to what you all share, like about the COVID thing, I know I saw like a meme somewhere where, like, you know, with the mask situation, that, oh, like if your child's wearing a mask, within 5 seconds, like they can look like a completely different individual, right? So they had like a picture of a little girl, and then the picture right next to it was the same girl but with the mask, and they had like, you know, folded their, like, their clothes or whatever, put a sweater over, and it's like you wouldn't even and put a hat on, and then there's like, you wouldn't even recognize your child, right? Like, you could be in the grocery store looking for your kid, and the kid has already left because of how the mask, you know, helps traffickers. So again, it's this fear tactic. And I think most of us doing anti-violence work, we don't want to approach this anti-violence work from fear, right? We want to do it from a place of education and understanding and prevention, and also taking into consideration all the things that play a role in these types of issues. So
Yeah, even just what you're talking about, Magdalena, with the fear factor of, oh, you put on a mask, you're suddenly a different person. This brings into talking about situational awareness and some of the stuff that we're trained on when it comes to being aware of what's in your environment, looking up. I talk to my clients about looking up every 10 seconds just to kind of see what's going on. I had a mom who had an interesting incident at a grocery store with a homeless man who just kept on wanting to hug her 2-year-old daughter, and she was so traumatized by it because it just was like he came out of nowhere. And I was like, okay, so situationally, what's going on? Are you paying attention to everything else that's going around you? What are certain things that you can do? And I think that we are right now, so many different topics are coming to mind, but with COVID, with the Save Your Children, with the political climate, with you know, Black Lives Matter and protesters and everything else, there's a lot of fear. In the United States, there's just a whole bunch of fear, but I feel like it, you know, it's percolated all over the world. But part of that is, okay, taking a step back, pausing, recognizing where that fear is coming from, and then transitioning that into a place of power. So for people who are wanting to be proactive when it comes to this, because I know we also want to talk about some other topics, but people who want to be proactive when it comes to human trafficking, what are certain things that they could be doing right now to help and support the effort?
I
I
think being
guess
with, uh, go ahead.
no, I no, I just wanted to say, but probably you're gonna say more. It's just that being educated, like being aware of the cultural background, like more cultural understanding as well, and just educate themselves, but from the right sources. um like before someone would, because it's an easy thing to donate money to an organization and then feel good about, like, okay, I've done it, I have to work in human child and sex trafficking. But researching that organization, I can't say this word, thoroughly. So let's
Thoroughly,
just research it very thoroughly. Thank you. So just research that organization, just know who they support and what they support and what methods they have and what narrative they share, who are the survivors they're like saying they're saving, whether they give them any support after they save them, because the criticism what I heard about, like for example, this big popular organization, is that we don't know much about how they help the survivors after they like save these children, and what, because they raid like these events, when these people want to exploit the children, and they raid them, and they send them, they arrest them or something like that. But like, what happens to those children? Like, how can we make sure that they don't fall back into this life? That's how they call it. Because it's a lot more complicated than that. Then they're just raiding these abusers and arresting them, and then the children are safe. Like, what happens to the children after? Like, it's important to research that as well, like what the organization does for them after they arrest the abusers. So people really need to dig into this and find the right information. Yeah. So sorry, Magdalena. Go
Thank
ahead.
you. I think similar to what you shared, I think also, at least my own philosophy in this work is I always try to look at things from the lens of the most marginalized communities. And that means learning from those communities, right? And not just looking at it from my lens, because I have privilege and seeing certain things a certain way, or saying I would never put myself in that situation, or I would never do that. So trying to be compassionate and looking at it from that lens, right? The most marginalized, and what do certain things look like from those communities, and how am I be, perpetrating violence by only viewing it from my lens. Research, I think, is really important. Connecting with people that do the work. I think we can't really eradicate gender-based violence or interpersonal violence if we're not centering the voices of survivors and the people that have been doing this work, right? And again, a lot of times the people doing the work are Black and women of color. So centering those voices, asking questions, making sure that things don't become political. Gender-based violence is not political. It's, that's it's a human right to be able to live free of, and safe. So being really mindful of that. This isn't a political thing. Lives are not political. Like, we shouldn't be, saying like, does this life deserve this, or which life is more worthy of the other, right? Like, it's a human right. And I think it's also addressing, like, I think I know, to kind of wrap up, how empowerment self-defense, like, that's also a great resource. I think when we think of self-defense, we think of like the physical component, but I know all of us as instructors, like you said, Tasha, we talk about situational awareness and boundaries and using your voice. And so those are great ways and resources to have, not just thinking of self-defense as a last resource, or only the physical component, but there's so many tools within empowerment self-defense to help you addressing it. Not just, I think the other thing that we only focus on, we know that women are impacted at higher rate, but young boys, I have a son, so I also am aware that sometimes the narrative or the information or education or prevention that's being put out there tends to focus on young girls, but we also know that our young boys are impacted. And I know, again, ESD is working towards how do we also make our boys aware of that they could also be in harm's way, right? Not
Yeah.
forgetting that. Again, it's such a complex issue, and making it one dimensional can be more harmful. So really just
Yeah.
being aware of like like what resources you have, having conversation with your children regardless of gender, and really centering survivors and people that have been doing this work for a while.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great points. And the other thing that I was going to say is that if you are someone who would like to get more information, you feel like someone is talking to you and they're just pile driving you with just a whole bunch of this narrative that doesn't feel right to you, uh, I highly recommend in that moment being able to pause them and just let them know, excuse me, I'm feeling very uncomfortable right now. I would like to do my own research. While I greatly appreciate and value what you have to say, I'm not in a space to hear it right now. So just understanding that you're setting those very clear boundaries. And that works for a lot of different topics. That actually works in our next topic. We were talking about the debates. Dun 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 dun. We were talking about these debates, and uh, and I just know that it is really something that can be very triggering for a lot of people. And I have had to set some pretty clear boundaries. I've also had people who, you know, who are close in my life who I'm like, oh, I just want to vent about how frustrated I am. And I've really appreciated it. Like my partner, he's just like, I'm just not in a space to talk to you about it. I know that this is an issue. And I love that he said that for me, because for what's going on right now and what happened, I mean, there were two debates, but let's just say for the first debate, I was so taken back just by the behavior, by the name calling, by so many different traits that I saw that were very triggering. And it did remind me a lot, and I'm sure that this is very true for a lot of people watching, that you have someone talking over you, you have someone cutting you off, you have someone dismissing what you have to say, saying that you're crazy. You know, like there's all of these different thoughts that are going through your head. And to me, I just thought, my gosh, this is all signs of an abuser. This is something where I am looking, and if I brought up the cycle of abuse, there would be so many different areas of this wheel that I am witnessing firsthand in an hour and a half. And so I just wanted to break open this conversation and be able to have a constructive talk about it. We did have, I thought that it was really great. So Judith, the founder of ESD, she actually did publish 6 different traits that were shown in the debate, and also just acknowledging different signs of an abusive behavior. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I think there are so many people who have all of these feelings that really it just did not sit well. And even a week later, it's just this gut-wrenching feeling and this dread of what's to come.
Yeah. So I know, again, we've been having these conversations, and that's been so helpful. And, just help. Like, it's one of my self cares to talk to both of you, right? Almost on a daily now about these issues. And I know we had discussed this, and I know we brought up like what a narcissist is and like some of the components of a harm doer. And you actually, as you were speaking, I mean, we've had this conversation and we share a lot of thoughts on this. As you were saying that, it brought up a memory for me, and I would like to share it because so prior to the role that I'm in, I used to work as a legal advocate at a local domestic violence agency. So part of my job, it was to support survivors of interpersonal violence that were seeking a restraining order. And so part of my job was to help them prepare for that hearing, right? So again, think of the hearing as the debate, right? Like Joe Biden had someone prepping him, right? What to expect, right? And so these are like the similarities I found, right? So I specifically, because something that stood out for me was the power and control dynamics, right? And when someone's listening, because when we talk about interpersonal violence or gender-based violence, when people say what is the root of gender-based violence is power and control. And when a harm doer is losing control or power in a relationship, I used to describe it to survivors as they were prepping. It's like they're holding on to dear life, right? Imagine someone falling from a cliff and they're just grabbing to whatever they can, right? And that's the cycle of violence, right? A lot of survivors will tell you like a harm doer will be like super nice to them and I love you and I didn't mean it. And when they realize that that's not working, then they become mean, right? And aggressive, and because they're just holding on, they're just trying to assert their control again, and whatever it takes they're gonna do, right? And they're gonna push your buttons because they want you to lose control so then they can assert themselves. So that's kind of what I think I saw in the debate with Trump. He, when he's losing control, he's just like hold, like whatever he can hold on to, he's gonna try to. um, and one of the things is, when I would help people prepare for the hearing, a lot of times they didn't know what to expect. And I would tell them, when someone's losing control as well, they tend to attack you on a personal level, right? Um, and a lot of times you might have shared very intimate parts of you in a relationship, and now that person is going to go on a court or on national TV to bring out some of those very harmful or hurtful parts of your life, right? And so I would help survivors prepare for that. Be prepared for at a hearing for the harm doer to bring up, things about your family, right? Well, or about your past, right? Like, oh, well, this person this, or their parents are this, the dad is an alcoholic, or whatever, right? To break you down. And I literally would, when I would prep, I would always have to say that to people to prepare them, right? To not be in shock when they would hear that. And also to not let that, throw them off and stay focused and continue with the hearing. Um, and so that reminded me of the debate when Trump brought up Joe Biden's his children and their history, right, with drug dependency. Um, and again, it's a harm doer losing control. And so, how can I throw you off, right? How can I hit you where it hurts? Um, and sorry that I use those terms because I try to be very mindful about language. But you know, what could he do? And it's bring up his children, and it's something very personal. And we see a lot of harm doers do that. They bring up personal things to throw you off, and to regain that control. And so, Tasha, as you were talking, that memory came back to mind that I used to have to prepare survivors in a hearing to hear those things used against them, right? And I want, like, what were people in Joe Biden's campaign also like helping him prepare and telling him, hey, he's going to bring up these things that are not even related to the debate, to throw you off. And to me, that's a clear sign of a harm doer or an abuser. And that we saw it on national TV, it kind of just activated me to those memories of me prepping people and then being in court. And because 90% of the times it would happen, right? That harm doer would bring up these things. Um, to discredit, right? And also to throw you off. Like, I think as a parent, like, if I'm in a conversation, an argument with someone, and they bring up my child, it'll definitely throw me off if I wasn't expecting it. And then it hits a part of us that it's like, how do you process that, right? Especially on national TV. And again, being felt like you should feel guilty for these things when drug dependency is it's an issue in our society, in this country. So many people are affected by it. And as a parent, it's also a very difficult thing to process, because as a society we tend to shame parents if our children have drug dependency. And we hear it all the time, right? What did the parents do wrong? um, and so I don't know, that's what it brought up for me as you were talking. There's a lot of stuff about the debate that was very activating, but that just took me back to that hearing where I'm having someone trying to present their case on why this person is a harm doer, or is not suited to do certain things, which is what we see in the debate. And then that harm doer then using these very personal things to discredit you.
Yeah. And it's just really interesting to me because we do have these two representatives, possibly, next president, who are older, who have their set ways of thinking and acting and being, and each of them definitely have certain traits. And so I thought that it was really interesting, the different attacks that happened, and what was attacked and why. And I was just looking at the cycle of abuse, so power and control. So looking at it, it's just you have coercion and threats. And I was thinking about when he was talking about the Proud Boys, stand up and stand and be ready, stand by. I just thought that was really interesting that someone couldn't flat out just say, I condemn racism, I condemn, this extremist mindset, and white supremacy. Um, that would have just ended it, but he couldn't say it. Instead, it was almost like a rally cry. And so looking at that could also go into intimidation. You have emotional abuse, so him attacking Biden's son. And how awful is that as a parent, as someone who loves their child? So take away, for example, like all of the political stuff, and just think, if someone was attacking your son, your dead son, who had to deal with this huge struggle in his life when it comes to, when it comes to drugs and misuse. How awful is it to have someone do that? And could you have compassion for the person who's on the other side, even if you are a supporter of this other person's narrative? Could you understand how that would be wrong? So it's really interesting to me just to kind of look at that. Just as to name some of the other ones, it's isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children right there, economic abuse, and male privilege. And so because of the situation, we have two white males who are running for office, and that can be disconcerting for a lot of different people who are trying to get ready to vote and trying to make these really difficult decisions. And what do you do when all of these different signs are popping up? So I just wanted to bring all of those up and see if either of you had any thoughts surrounding that.
I just read through what you mentioned, what you did wrote as well about like red flag behaviors, and we could observe many of these on national TV during the debates, and especially during this heightened election times. And I don't know if we mentioned that yet, but the six things she's bringing up, and I will read her articles on it as well, is snarky, disrespectful tone of voice, non-stop barrage of interruptions, constant changing of topic to push agenda, flinging personal insults, attempting to humiliate, poking at past pains and loss. And so I guess we can all agree that when we teach as self-defense instructors, especially when we have that stop-like activity, these could be stuff we ask the students like, okay, um, how in what level of danger you feel you are in, whether you're like green, feeling comfortable, yellow, feeling a little or red, like you're in immediate danger. Like, where would you put these? And these are definitely red flags. Like if your partner would behave this way, or a family member, coworker, friend, or anyone, that would be a huge red flag. And it's just crazy to see how politicians and political leaders do this behavior so millions of people can see it. And I hope that most people know that this is not okay, and this is red flag, and this is not a behavior which is there, for example. But the problem is, because these people are so popular and people follow them, I think the danger is that people will feel justified in doing this behavior with their family members, co-workers, with people around them. And I think that's kind of scary. So I think there needs to be um, direct message, or just for everyone to know that this is not okay to behave this way, and that it's a huge red flag, and it's not something others need to follow. I hope that's clear for people, but not sure.
Yeah.
These are just my thoughts about this one.
Yeah, I obviously agree. The things that come up for me in regards to this is one, the gaslighting, right, which is part of the cycle of violence. So gaslighting is in a relationship or in an abusive environment, is the harm doer making you feel like you're the problem, or you're crazy, or you're out of control, or that what they're doing isn't wrong, right? And I think that that's part of the tactic that Trump uses, right? Gaslighting the other individual into feeling like they're the ones at fault. Like he always excuses his behavior as saying, "I'm just responding," right? And he doesn't see how he perpetrates violence or he escalates situations, which is very interesting when we talk about like the politics in the US at the moment. When we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, and how people that are against it, say like this group or this movement or these protesters, they're inciting violence and they're escalating, right? But the tactics that Trump uses are to escalate, because I connected to part of my ESD. When I do my workshops, I focus a lot on the non-physical, non-violent communication, because I think those are practical things. Most times, most people might not need to use the physical component, but the verbal and the nonviolent, and we always want to de-escalate, right? Like we want, if we can get a situation that is escalating to de-escalate, and we don't have to use those physical tools, that is the best solution. So, when I talk about nonviolent communication, part of that is everything the opposite of what you just mentioned, right? About like being snarky, and like we always talk about, like when you're asking someone, if you need space, how to make a statement that doesn't, pass judgment, that there's no snarkiness, right? So people won't take it personal, because once we take it personal, that's when things can escalate, right? So what we teach is the complete opposite, right? To de-escalate things. And the things that Trump uses during his debate and just in general are to escalate, to push boundaries, right? To make the other person lose control and then gaslight them and say, like, see, it wasn't me, it's you, you're the problem. Um, so it's interesting to me from that lens again, because we're trying to talk about how do we de-escalate situations, how do we give tools to individuals to ask for their space or what they need, from a non-judgmental position. But then I also see the Trump supporters who are then criticizing movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, saying that they're escalating violence, that they're doing all this stuff. But that's exactly what Trump does on national TV, and I think that's also part of a narcissist, that they have people believe them, right? They're just can be charismatic, right? Or they can just speak in a manner that makes people believe them. And so we have Trump supporters saying what he's doing is not escalating this into violence or, harm, but then looking at other movements that are calling for racial justice and saying they're escalating it. And I think that's the really scary part, even for survivors, right? That's one of the activating things. Again, in the work that I did as an advocacy, most survivors would say, like, people believe this person, right? They follow this person. They are charismatic. They're well liked. People can't see no wrong in what they do. And when survivors are watching Trump do these things that can mirror either what they're living at the moment or what they've lived, and then see people defending him, it can bring them back to, like, that's exactly my experience. I try to not watch Trump, because it is activating for me. So I usually read things. The debate was something that I watched, and that's one of the things I noticed, that if I didn't know the things I know about him and I watched him speak, he speaks in a manner that makes you believe that he knows what he's talking about. He's so confident, and that's another factor into narcissists, right? Like, they present in a very confident way that you start believing what they're saying. They could be talking nonsense, but because they sound so confident in what they're saying, you believe them. So I've also, like, that's one of the things that I've noticed. I was like, if I didn't know what I know and I were to watch him, I would be like, this guy knows what he's talking about. Because even when he's lying, he's just so 100% like, I know what I'm saying. It's another characteristic of a narcissistic individual. And I know none of us are licensed therapists, and I know we can't, diagnose him, but again, we can see those characteristics in him and see how that's why it can be so activating for survivors.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh, so many great points. I know that um, for a lot of us who have had people in our lives who are like that, that was a really difficult moment to just watch and have someone berating someone else, someone diminishing someone else and verbally putting them down. I was thinking as you were talking, just about past experiences for me in relationships when it came to the cycle of abuse. And I know that I've been in relationships where uh, everyone outside, it was like, oh, you're the it couple. Everything looks perfect. Oh my gosh, he's so nice. Oh, he's so smart. He's so funny. He's so charismatic. And behind closed doors, I'm getting yelled at. I'm getting put down. Nothing I would do was right. There's, this raging that would happen. And so, me watching that, it was very triggering. It's something that um, if you have had that experience, it's really important, I think, for you to just take a step back and recognize that one, that you're not in it, you're witnessing it, but then two, also understanding that um, this behavior has less to do with you and more to do with that other person. And then what can you do to get out of it? So that's something that I think could have been obviously handled better in that situation in the debate, because his mic wasn't turned off when he just kept on going and going. There were boundaries that people would try to set, but it was just pile driven over. And how do you address that kind of behavior? What can you do to put a stop to that behavior? So that would be a question that I would ask both of you.
Yeah. I teach a lot of like non-violent communication, de-escalation in my self-defense and just in the one-on-ones that I've done in advocacy work and even now in my role as an administrator. Um, but it's really, I mean, I know it's different for a debate, but I do think that at some point, if Joe Biden wanted to walk away, he could have, right? And I get that I'm not a politician and people might see that as a sign of weakness, but I think that's also how we change the social narrative around, who is weak in a situation like that, right? If we walk away like you're a weak individual, but I think there's a lot more strength in walking away, right? Especially when he started bringing up things about his family, things that were not pertaining to the debate or to politics. So that's something that I could think of, right, in my personal experience and working with individuals impacted by these types of things. It's like, it's okay to walk away, you know? It's not a sign of weakness. Because that's the other thing we know with harm doers, right? They're trying to like probe you, and if we don't give them that, then they have nothing. um I think, I don't know, again, there's parts of this that I don't know and we're looking from the outside, but I think knowing what we know about Trump, I was also surprised at, like, was there no discussion that they knew this, because we saw this in the debates with Hillary Clinton as well, right? So this isn't new. So was there no guidelines? Like, we know in advocacy we do like safety plans, right? When things go sideways, what are we going to do? We're preparing. So was there no safety? And it's even saying that sounds so bizarre to me, that we're safety planning in regards to the president of the United States. Like, what world do we live in when we have to have those conversations, right? But safety planning around, like, we know he's gonna, like, more than likely just go off, and what do we do to prevent not only the people there from being harmed, but just the country. Because outside of interpersonal violence, I think these types of situations happen in a lot of homes, right? It doesn't have to be with an intimate partner. Sometimes it's like a parent or sibling. These relationships happen a lot, or these situations. I think being able to be aware that it's not personal, like you said, Tasha, I think that's really important, because the moment when we start taking things personally, I think that's when we can also sometimes lose that control and react in ways that maybe later on we're like, that's not really, how I wanted to react. um yeah, I think safety planning, every time we're going to watch Trump, I think we need to safety plan around that, which is such a bizarre thing to say.
Yeah, I agree with Magdalena. And what just come to my mind, like what to do if someone starts doing that behavior towards you, like flooding you with insults and interrupting you, and like what to do when you experience this personally. Like, we know that one of the principles of empowerment self-defense is run. And run not not just means that you like literally run away, but you know when to leave a situation. And when you are emotionally abused, verbally insulted in a situation, that's not a safe situation. It might not be an unsafe situation for you physically, can turn to be physically unsafe as well. But even if it's just unsafe emotionally, that's unsafe. Then you have all the right to leave the situation right then and there. And it doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you're protecting yourself and you're defending yourself. And I agree that like this could be normalized in society, that when you leave an abusive situation, it doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you have strength, you know your boundaries, and you know just when to leave and what to do. That's very important because no one should take abuse. Or I don't know how to say, like, no one is required to just be there and hear all these insults directed at them, and they have all the right to leave. And even if that person will yell after them or name call them or abuse them through text messages or something, they have all the right to set their own boundaries and leave a situation um, when it's important, when they're in danger verbally or emotionally. And a situation like that can mean that,
Yeah.
what we observed on that presidential debate.
And you also brought up the 5 principles of self-defense. One of them, first, is think. So I talk to my clients a lot about having a check-in with yourself. So how am I feeling right now? If somebody's berating me, how do I feel? And what do I need? That might mean that you need to walk away. That also might mean that you are not in a space to listen to what that person has to say. And when it comes to abusers, one major thing that happens, this also has to do with an attacker. It's very linear thinking. What do I want to do? Attack. What do I want to do? Harm this person verbally, mentally, physically, emotionally. And so, how do you disrupt that behavior? You have to change the narrative. So, there are so many different things that you could do to disrupt the behavior. I wish that the moderator would have done something more. Even in the debate last night, I wish the moderator would have turned off his mic after the 2 minutes, because I do believe that it is very important that each get the same amount of time to be able to speak. And when it comes to especially women, I think that men have a tendency to talk over women, dismiss women for what they have to say. And right now we have a woman who is going for VP, who has equal footing and an equal right to speak and have and share about what her goals are for the nation. So it's really interesting to look at the debates, see what happened, see the narrative, and then also see what could I do in that situation if I have someone who is, who is saying all of these very negative things. And I like what you were saying, Magdalena and Reka, about walking away, because he did not have to at that point. I don't believe that there is really any shame in walking away when someone is going after your dead child. I think that that's just such a horrific thing to do. And so there's those pieces. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts on this before we get into the last topic that we had brought up, but I just wanted to open it up just in case.
I think for me, it's important to normalize, walking away, setting boundaries, normalizing it, right? We talk about in violence prevention that one of the main vehicles of prevention is the media, especially with younger generations. And what are we putting out in the media through like TV, through like social media, through the internet? That's normalizing certain behaviors, right? And this was a perfect example where we could have normalized setting boundaries, normalized walking away when something is no longer serving you, is no longer healthy for you, or is not going to go anywhere. Because that debate was just, I don't even have a word for it, right? Like we were not going to get anywhere at that point. Um, I think it's important when I know for me, like when I talk to about violence prevention, I said it's not just about protecting your time, but protecting your energy, right? Is this worth it? Am I going to gain anything from this? And at that point, I mean, within the 5 minutes, we knew that there was nothing we were going to gain. So this would have been a great example to normalize that, to normalize walking away from unhealthy situations, to normalize setting boundaries. I think those are really important things to keep in mind, and just to remind people that it's okay to do that. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to set these boundaries. Um, and going back to like the principles of ESD, I think for me, think is also a really important one. And when I think of when you're in a situation like this, taking a moment to breathe and think, whose needs am I validating and fulfilling at this moment? Because that's the other thing we have to remember in regards to harm doers. Regardless what action you take, you're going to be wrong in their eyes, right? So in this situation with Joe Biden and Trump, um, Biden staying and listening to Trump just go off, Trump was able to, flip it and make Biden the bad guy, right? If Biden had walked away, Trump would have also done the same. So there's no winning. And so that's why taking a moment to think, whose needs am I fulfilling at this moment? And what is it that I need to address my needs, and not think about the other person or what the other person's going to do or how they're going to feel about the decision you make is really important, because a harm doer, no matter what decision you take, even if you think you're taking them into consideration, they're going to find a way to flip it. Then you're never going to be right with them. So you really need to focus on what you need, and fulfill those needs.
Yeah. Reka, did you have any closing thoughts on that?
Yeah. I just agree. I think we addressed this and talked about the importance of setting boundaries and walking away and leaving a situation, and normalizing that in society would be very important. So these are just my closing thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And I mean that setting boundaries also just brings us to our last topic, the super spreader that's happening right now with COVID. There's so many different narratives that are coming up, and I think a lot of people right now are very fatigued. They're very tired because they have been in quarantine for so long, and they're just tired of wearing masks. They're tired of taking all of these safety precautions. They want life to go back to normal, and so then we have this outbreak that happens, and there's so many different things that are going along with that need to be addressed. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on that. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, a very interesting time, right? I think, especially living in the United States and seeing how, again, I I don't know if it's the self-awareness, but that everything is political, just like Save Our Children became political, right? Um, Something like a pandemic becoming a political thing, where most the rest of the world handle it as like a public health concern, right? In this country, we see it as a political thing. Um, and to me, one of the most shocking things with having the president, you know, come out and say that he tested positive, one of the most shocking things for me, and I think it goes back to like the distrust, like any like unhealthy relationship, not being able to trust, right? um, and I do a lot of comparison in regards to my relationship with this country, and compare a lot sometimes with like an unhealthy relationship or an abusive relationship in regards to the feelings that it elicits and how I navigate my relationship with this country. um, but to me, like one of the biggest things was that we don't even believe the president when he says he's sick. Like, what dimension do we live in that we can't even trust them in him saying he's sick, right? And again, it's very reminiscent of an abusive relationship or a toxic relationship where you can't trust anything they say, because the first thing that comes to mind is like, is this person saying this to like manipulate me, to like, again, the cycle of violence, right? Like one of the things which I know, it's kind of outdated, but one of the things that we use when it comes to psycho violence is like, going from like the honeymoon stage where everything's like perfect and wonderful in an abusive relationship, right? And the tension building. And then there's an incident of violence. And then it's like we go back to the honeymoon stage and we go to tension building and then we get to like violence, right? And so to me, what happened with the debate, that was an incident of abuse that occurred between the president and our country. And in the honeymoon stage, there's different tactics that a harm doer can utilize, right, to get you to forgive them for the harm they've caused, right? And one of them is like, I'm really sorry. Like, I know when there's separation, when you leave that relationship, they start saying like, I'm going through this, all these horrible things are happening, and I really need you. I need you there because I'm having such a hard time, right? And it made me think like, is that what Trump did, right? There was a violent incident and he's losing, control again and using this, I really need you all, right? Because I'm sick. So I need the support of my country. Was it a tactic used to get people back to like see him from a place of empathy? Because I know that it was one of the bigger criticisms for a lot of progressive or liberals, that when he did come out saying that he tested positive, a lot of people were wishing him well, right? And people were like, no, like why? Like, he's using this to get you to feel bad for him, which we see in the honeymoon stage, right? Like a harm doer will do things so you can feel bad and then go back to that relationship, and then the cycle of violence occurs again. um so again, that's what it made me think of, like, and that's one of the things that stood out for me, like, wow, we live in a time where we can't even trust the president when he says he's sick. Like, that's where we are as a society in this country. um and again, and then his disregard, right, of like COVID, and not seeing the privilege that he had, if he did or does have it. um Him coming out and saying it's not a big deal. Again, I think we talked about one of the tactics is minimizing, right? And minimizing the impact, but not bringing awareness to the reason why maybe to him it wasn't as bad, is because he has all these resources at hand to address it that most of us won't have, right? So
Doctors,
Yeah.
medication, round the clock service. Yeah.
Yeah. I heard a good metaphor that this was Trump's let them eat cake moment,
Hmm.
if you guys understand this difference.
No, explain
Uh,
that.
so so Mary Antoinette in the 18th century said that to the peasants when they complained that we don't have enough bread. So they told the king and the queen, and then she just said like, "Oh, they don't have bread? Let them eat cake." So it's kind of like, I don't know. I understand how this relates to it because yeah, Trump has the best medical care, government medical care, and everything. And then 3 days after he gets sick, he walks out of the hospital, and they're like, "Oh, I feel better than 20 years ago. Like, what are you guys complaining about?" So it's kind of similar that way. That like, oh, they don't have bread, let them eat cake.
Yeah.
So it's just minimizing this when he is so privileged that he has really the best medical care, the best drugs and everything. And then he says like, "Oh, don't be afraid of COVID. Don't live in fear. Just live your life." It's nothing. It's kind of like that. What he tweeted, it was just so insensitive, I think, especially to those who were victims of this illness. And yeah, it's just very insensitive.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting because I don't know if either of you have had somebody close to you who has tested positive, but one of my best friends on the mainland did actually test positive. She got it from her boyfriend, and then her boyfriend ended up getting it again. And neither of them had pre-existing conditions. And afterwards, now he has a heart murmur. And so just to watch this person who I really love and care for um, dealing with this sickness. I also have a client that I work with who is 11 months into being over COVID and still has respiratory issues and everything else. And so there's a part of me that sees that happening. I have another client whose mother passed because of it, another person whose grandparent passed because of it. And you could say, oh, well, that person was old. Oh, well, this person had a pre-existing condition. And, and there's truth to that. But understanding, one of my friends, she said it beautifully, basically stating that, yes, my grandmother, she was older, but she could have lived so much longer, and she was recovering from this pre-existing condition, and then suddenly her life was gone. And so just having this understanding that one person's experience does not represent a whole, and also having compassion. And so I would hope that the people who are watching that, who suddenly feel emboldened and think, oh, it's just fine, I'm going to be fine, will also consider that there's other narratives depending on their location and where they live. The healthcare on the island of Maui is not the greatest, and it's not necessarily because they don't care. It's because there aren't as many resources here. There isn't as much staff. There isn't that capacity. So the idea, we are opening up soon. For us, if we have a whole bunch of people coming in and more people get sick, the beds are going to be full. We're not going to have as much access to the different resources that we might need. We're not going to have those kind of medications that suddenly, like a week later, we're like, okay, I'm ready to go back to the office. And so just being able to take a step back and actually look through that lens of a person who doesn't have the resources that you do, I think that would have been very humanizing, and I don't see that he did that, and instead saw him do, a drive-by to let everybody know he's doing just fine. So,
Again, the narcissism that comes with like putting other people in danger just so you can seem powerful,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think for me, I always again, my lens on these issues and any issues is intersectional from the most marginalized communities, looking at from that perspective or that lens, or starting there. Um, and also not looking at issues as one dimensional, right? And yeah, COVID, we talk about it as people that are impacted because they have either tested positive or had someone close to them test positive or die from it. But the pandemic has impacted people in all kinds of ways, not just by being testing positive, or we see people that even when family members don't pass away from COVID in this pandemic, a lot of people haven't been able to grieve family members because you can't come together, right, for a funeral or to be in community or with family when you have a tragedy occur, because we have these restrictions, right? To see people that can't even grieve family members when they pass away, or when something happens in their life because of this pandemic, and trying to be have safety as a priority. And then we see Trump driving in a car because he wants to seem powerful again, not just about even like testing positive, but what you have access to um when you put safety on the front for like as an important part of your life, and when you disregard safety, right? Individuals that he was able to work from the hospital. There are individuals that don't have access to that, right? I live in a county where we've reopened because of the county numbers have like gone down, but there's certain communities within this county that are impacted at a higher rate, and it's usually communities of color, communities with lower socioeconomic status, and their numbers are not going down, right? They're still, because if they get sick, a lot of times they still have to work. They still have to take care of their children. They don't have this access to support and resources. um, so I think it's not just one dimensional in regards to like, oh well, if I get it, I'm young and nothing bad's going to happen. It's how has the pandemic impacted us in all kinds of way, not just being testing positive, but like being able to be in community if you need it at this time. I know for me personally, my family has experienced different tragedies throughout this pandemic, and it has been very difficult to process and grieve because we have to have safety as a priority and we can't come together. And that's part of my community, right? That's part of my culture. And I've had to put that aside for not just my safety, but the safety of my family and the communities that I'm part of. And to see Trump just completely disregard that, again, I think it sends a very clear message to me that he is not, to me, community is very important, and community healing. And I don't think he can ever be part of a community because he only sees himself.
No, I agree. I think that, he definitely sets himself apart and really wants to embody this strong, charismatic, fearless leader. And part of, I think, what makes a great leader is being able to show vulnerability and also being able to share when something is wrong, share the facts, protect that community. Um, I I just see so many different red flags when it comes to what happened, even at the event that he ended up apparently getting COVID. Uh, there were just so many precautions that were not taken. You have a room full of people. We're being told, here that we can't have a group larger than 10 in person. How many people were in attendance at that event, not masked, not socially distanced, not wearing gloves, just walking around, hugging, doing all this other stuff. And so, yeah, there were different consequences that actually came along with that. And and it also brings up the other factor too. Why are they having that event right now? Someone just died. And do you not want to honor this person who was an icon to so many different women out there, and give her the space and time she deserves and the recognition she deserves, and then fill the space after you have won fairly? I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in on that. There was
Yeah.
like a mic drop moment.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much with what, the COVID, but also the event, like you mentioned, what that meant, and the politics that have, the dirty politics that have come out when we see his nomination, and when we saw with Obama, that was like, no, we can't do that. And you know and it's difficult. I think it's difficult to see these examples, on national TV, and then have to live our lives and not take that into consideration when we're building like relation, right? I think, again, also that comes from, like, yeah, like for them, they're gonna get, everyone there, right, is gonna get the best access to healthcare, right? And again, that's the very interesting thing to me, that he had access to healthcare, right? He just had this scandal with taxes and him not paying taxes, and he's very anti, like, socialism, and like, be, if you don't pay taxes, you shouldn't have access to all these public benefits. But he literally just had like the best, doctors and medicine, and he hasn't paid taxes to make him deserving of that. And how he's able to change the narrative and not make those connections, and how he doesn't lead by example, right? He says one thing and does the other. And again, what I'm always shocked is when people still support, or are able to excuse his behavior, how they don't look at all the other, like, the things he does and says, they don't match up. The same thing with, having this big event, and then we have these stay-at-home orders. Like, for me, like, I'm working from home, and that sometimes can be very frustrating when I'm like here, right, dealing with a pandemic at home with a 10-year-old, with all that comes with it. And then I see people like the administration or like community just going out and living their life, and it's like, well, why am I still working from home? And there's people that are living life like we're not in the middle of a pandemic. And so, but even like, it was what was really interesting was that I was just watching this show, um, political commentary, and it was last week, right after Trump came out and said that he tested positive. The following day, on Friday, they were at the White House, right, meeting with different staff members at the White House to get updates, and they were still not wearing a mask. And people were asked, like some of the journalists were like, "Well, why are you not wearing a mask?" Right, and like the president just says a positive. Like, what's gonna make you understand, right, that we and one of the journalists that even said, like, even if we're 6 feet apart, like the president is in the hospital, like just lead by example, wear a mask, because when they see the White House not wearing a mask, then people think like, if they're not doing it, we don't have to. Like, why can't, even if you, and that's what I've said to people, like, even if you don't believe in COVID, even if you think that you are fine because you're young and healthy, like, just wear a mask. Like, what, that does not infringe on your rights, right? Like, it's not a big deal. It's like, I actually had an experience with someone that didn't want to wear a mask out when I was out in public, and I was like, it's like the same thing, right? Like, if as a woman, if I were trying to go to the mall without a t-shirt on, I would not be allowed, right? And so I wear a shirt. And I mean, I live in California. Sometimes it's over 100 degrees. And what would be most comfortable for me is to not wear a shirt because I'm hot, but I have
Yeah.
to do it. So again, even saying like comfortable or like, whatever, it's like we all have to do things sometimes that is uncomfortable.
It's
Because
ours.
yeah, because it's what's expected. So, but again, if you're having the president or the White House saying like we don't take precaution, it's not a big deal, then people are gonna follow that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, with all these masks and everything, is I feel like it's just sad how it was politicized, this whole thing, especially in the US, because it would be just I don't know, here in Hawaii I didn't face any problems. I feel like here people take care of each other, and I haven't seen that many complaints about masks or anything like that. So so yeah, it would just be common sense to wear masks, but then also I feel like it's a cultural resistance from like Western culture towards this mask wearing. Because when I went to Asia, in like Japan, I saw so many people wearing masks even before COVID. It was just, and I was surprised first, like, oh, why? But then I learned it's because they want to take care of each other. That's what I heard there, that they feel bad if they make someone else sick, if they have minor symptoms. And yeah, so mask wearing shouldn't be a big deal. I personally feel like it's just crazy how they translate it into something like a fight for freedom against masks. It's just like, I don't know, it's just weird. My parents grew up under communism rule in Hungary, and I just feel like that's crazy that people think that this is a fight against communism or socialism, that they have to, that they don't want to wear masks. I don't know. It's just a really different topic, but that's just some of my thoughts regarding this.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that it's such a
And
it's a small thing. Oh, I'll just say that it's such a small thing, and to look at a lot of people of color and different rights that white people predominantly take for granted, that people of color and predominantly Black people in general have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, from um, being targeted, having to deal with racial profiling, having to deal with um, different comments, different things. If you looked at a lot of the protests, I noticed that if there's a white guy walking around with a shotgun, not that big of a deal. If you see a Black person walking around with a gun, oh my gosh, it's a shooter. You better do
yep.
something. So that's the narrative that we've created, and you can see the dichotomy, the just how frustrating it is to be in a different space, dealing with this narrative, coming at it from a different lens, and and then people are frustrated about having to wear a mask because, oh, this is so hard. Oh, I can't breathe too well. There's a lot that could be said about that.
Yep. And what I was gonna say is, and if I also were to walk into the mall or a store without a shirt, I probably would be arrested,
Yeah,
right?
indecent
And if you,
exposure.
yes,
Right.
and people, and I would probably be on a, like if it's decent exposure, some states even have a registry for things like that. But if you're to like walk in without a mask, there's really no repercussions.
Well,
So like,
countries there are. You've got fines and everything else up the yin yang, but here not necessarily.
mhm.
Um, well, gosh, this has been
Yeah.
awesome. I feel like we've covered a lot. But yeah, I just really appreciate both of you for being able to share your thoughts and share your time. I think that it's really nice to just hear different different points of view because it definitely helps me grow. The hope is that it will also help other people in the audience. They might have to take a break in between and then start the start the session again, to hear more. But I love just having this opportunity. Yeah.
Same.
Agreed.
Everyone, if you have a
Yeah.
support to have these conversations, it is one of the most healing things that you can do for yourself. Remember that healing is an ongoing journey, and taking a pause and creating space for yourself with loved ones or people that are like-minded can be very healing and reinforce just that, it's okay to take a breather. It's okay to have these conversations.
Yeah. I just agree, and I appreciate everything we talked about today. We covered so many topics, and but it's so important to talk about these things, and I can see how um, talking about these different topics can really be healing. For even just talking about it, but even listening to what both of you said has been very helpful to me, and I'm looking forward for the next discussions and roundtables. So it has been really great. I feel it's a great way of self-care, I think. I
It
feel
For
is
great.
sure.
definitely. So yeah, no, thank you to you both for coming on. I'm excited for our next one. Who knows what the topics are going to be by then? Especially as we
Yeah.
get closer and closer to the election, I know that there's going to be different topics that are going to come up. So definitely tune in. If you do want to share with friends or vent with friends, one thing that I would note, just as a boundary setting thing, is it's always great to ask and see if they're in a space or willing to listen to you vent, if they're in a space to listen to the different topics that are shared, because I know that if I'm in a really good space, then I can listen to all of those things. But if I had a really bad day or different stuff that happened, I might not be as receptive. So just asking them and then just checking in, because just because they don't want to listen to you at that moment may not mean that they don't want to listen to you at all. And it is very healing. So yeah. Thanks.
Thank
True.
you.
All right.
Yes. Thank you.
You take
Okay.
care.